So for our study, we set out to design a controlled experiment that assessed the type of wood, either deciduous or evergreen, that the O. disjunctus, or Bess beetle as they're commonly known as, prefer in order to determine their food preferences. While Bess beetles are normally found in deciduous trees such as oak, hickory, or maple, they can also be found in other evergreen trees as well, such as cedar. So because few studies have been done on the Bess beetle to test this particular food preference, we wanted to get some helpful insight into not only the specific benefits of one certain type of food, but also hint at changes in the environment. For example, if the food in which the Bess beetle primarily feeds upon is abundant, then the Bess beetle population will most likely flourish and be abundant there as well. So in this experiment, we hypothesized that the Bess beetles would prefer the deciduous types of wood due to the fact that deciduous trees have a shorter lifespan than the evergreen trees, and so they're often falling and shedding leaves, giving the Bess beetles more of a likely habitat than the evergreen trees, and so this would be where the Bess beetles would be most comfortable.
In order to test this hypothesis, Bess beetles were exposed to different deciduous and evergreen wood chips for the same amount of time, and the amount of time in each chamber was recorded. Each chamber held 5 different wells: 2 wells of deciduous wood chips, including oak and hickory, 2 wells of evergreen wood chips, including pine, coconut, and cedar, and an empty well at the center as a control. Each type of wood chip was added to a single well and spritzed with water in order to try and mimic the decaying wood of the beetles' natural habitat. Each beetle was exposed to a chamber by placing it into the center with no food. It remained in the chamber for 5 minutes, and the time spent in each well was recorded. After each trial, the wells which the beetles entered were cleaned with water and a Kimtech wipe, then refilled with the same type of wood. This process was repeated with 11 beetles the first day and 9 beetles on the second day. In order to determine food choice, the amount of time spent in each well was divided by the total time the beetles were exposed to the well. After this experiment was conducted, the average time spent in each chamber per day were calculated and ANOVA analyses were performed. Because the type of evergreen wood was switched between the first and second days, 2 sets of analyses were performed in order to test the influence of each wood type each day. On the first day, when oak, hickory, pine, and coconut wood chips were used, the beetles spent the most time in the deciduous oak and hickory wells, and far less time in the evergreen, pine, and coconut wells. The beetles spent around 66% of the time in the deciduous wells, while only 24% of the time was spent in the evergreen wells. This supports our hypothesis that the deciduous wells would be favored over the evergreen wells. On the second day, we switched out the coconut wood and used cedar instead, due to the fact that the beetles spent the least amount of time in the coconut wells, and we wanted to test another type of evergreen. Contrary to our hypothesis, the beetles spent the most time in the cedar wells instead of the deciduous wells. The Bess beetles spent approximately 46% of their time in the evergreen wells, while only spending around 33% of their time in the deciduous wells.
The main reason that cedar might have been visited most by the Bess beetle is because the Bess beetle was exposed to it for the least amount of time. This will alter the statistical power of the results. This is similar to the coconut wood chips, which the Bess beetles were also exposed to for the second least amount of time. With less exposure, the statistical significance of the result is compromised. Although Bess beetles typically feed on deciduous trees because they are close to the ground, it might be possible that exposure to something new might have attracted the beetles to the evergreen wood chips, such as cedar. Another source of error might have occurred due to the presence of a control. It was necessary for the beetles to enter the control chamber before entering any other chamber, which might have taken away time which the beetles could have spent exposed to the wood chips. At the same time, a control is very important as a way to compare independent variables to a standard.